Good afternoon, ladybugs and yellow jackets. Welcome to this Friday's episode of Author Reads. I am your host, Fairy Princess Lolly, and as you all are well aware, with our standard procedures here, I will be starting our show off by saying first, please like and subscribe and smash the bell button if you would like to get notifications of our future shows. We do 3 of them a week, and next up will be Handmade Home Shopping on Sunday. So please do that. Also, I want to give a shout out to today's show sponsor, which is James Bay Distillers. And you may have actually seen them. They were on just a couple of weeks ago for our Fay News interview segment. And then they also have been on Handmade Home Shopping. They are a local craft distillery, and they specialize in spirits and premium whiskeys and gins. Very, very good. If you would like to purchase some of their stuff, you can go to their website. It is going there in the ticker, but they are an exporter of, to put it in their words, super premium Canadian Scotch and American whiskeys and gins. So they are open. Their actual showroom is open on Tuesday to Saturday from 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. And this is actually how we discovered them. At Payne Field, we went down and we did a taste testing, which I believe they can still do, because I know that we're here in round 2 of quarantine. But I believe that if they are scheduled ahead of time with a small group of people, they can still do that. So if you were interested and you are local here to the Snohomish area, actually, then this could be something for you to still be able to get out and go and do. Plus, you will get an amazing tour of their actual distillery there, and they know their business, folks. So please check out James Bay Distillers. You can also purchase from them online. So all of the information is there, also in the low bar as well. You can find them now or after the show. So with all of that said and out of the way, that brings us to our author of the day. Hello, Gustavo. I don't know if I'm going to say your last name right. So shall I try, or shall you just say it?
I'll say it. It's Bondoni. It's no strange pronunciation there. Just how it reads.
Okay, that is actually how I would have said it. So the Bondoni. So, well, welcome here to the show. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. If you will, please tell us a little bit about what it is, like, where are you from? What do you write? Like, give us a little sneak peek into you.
So I'm from Argentina. I live in Buenos Aires, which is where I'm transmitting from now.
You're really actually in Buenos Aires right now.
I'm in Buenos Aires right now. It's 7 o'clock. It's late spring. And
that is amazing.
So yeah, it's Argentina. I can look out and see Buenos Aires through my window over there. So,
I used to have a very good friend from Argentina, but he said that Argentina is different than people from Buenos Aires in Argentina. He said it is its own kind of thing, and he gave me a book that I still have by Jorge Luis Borges.
Cool.
Yeah,
well, that's the main Argentine author that everyone has to read.
Right.
So you at least started in the right place. So yes, I'm in Buenos Aires. I write a little bit of everything, but I mainly write science fiction and fantasy. That's what sells the best, at least. I do have some mainstream work out there, both books and short fiction.
Mm-hmm.
So mainly I do science fiction and fantasy, and a little bit of horror, survival horror, monster books, that kind of thing.
So I'm curious, is the feel of horror or science fiction fantasy different, do you think, in Argentina versus in America? And if so, what's it like? Yeah.
It's a lot different. Argentina, the literary tradition in Argentina is a lot more European. Mm-hmm. I am kind of a strange Argentinian author because I'm much more influenced by Anglo-Saxon literature, English and American literature. Basically, because I grew up in the U.S., and when I wasn't in the U.S., I actually lived in Europe. So I went.
Oh, wow.
I went to American schools in Europe. So I did a little bit of traveling when I was younger, and now I'm back in Argentina. So now I brought all of that with me, and every once I get together with other science fiction authors here in Argentina, and they're all like, well, but do you really like Asimov? Yeah, I grew up with Asimov. It's kind of a weird conversation.
You are a well-traveled person. Do you know how many countries you have been to?
I don't remember, but it's around 25, I think.
Man, that's a lot of countries. The only place I can say I've been down there is Peru. So
it's a good place to go. It's probably the best place if you want to go sightseeing.
Yeah, well, we went to Machu Picchu, so I guess, I mean, there is that, but there's so many things. I actually went when I was there. My whole purpose of going to South America was to actually see the Southern Cross, the constellation, and I almost didn't get to. I was there for, I don't know, something like 10 days or whatever, and the whole time it was cloudy except for this one brief little window, and I was on a train coming back from Cusco, and I was like, there it is, looking out the train window. Oh man.
Funny. So where are you actually based? I know you.
Seattle. Well, technically, I'm in Everett, Washington. It's like 30 minutes north of Seattle. So, yeah.
My best friend was in Seattle.
Oh, nice. So, how did you get into writing? What got you started? Is that what you actually went to school for, or did you go to school for something different, and then this is where life took you?
I'm actually an engineer.
Okay.
So, and I'm an engineer with an MBA. So I'm kind of part of the evil corporate empire that everyone always speaks badly about. Like I worked a long time for really, really big companies. But the truth is, I've been telling stories since I can remember, really. And if you ask my brother, he can tell you how tortured he was because he was younger, and I used to tell him all my stories. So from then, when I was living in Europe, Switzerland, there were days when it was dark at 4 o'clock. So we would play outside, and then we'd go inside. And basically, we had no TV because cable was like 8 channels. Only one of them was in English. And that one started transmitting like at 8 o'clock. So you really didn't have all that much to do. You could play some Atari. I'm not that young. So
that's okay. I had an Atari too.
Basically what you could do is sit down and read. So I started reading, and writers are basically readers who sometimes sat down and said, hey, I could do that too. And that's what happened to me. And I really started writing a lot older than most do. I started writing like at 25. So, and I started publishing a little later, like a couple of years later. So it's something that really I came to a little late, but that I really enjoy, and that's part of my life. So I just can't, I don't often go a weekday without writing. Sometimes the weekend just catches me and takes me places, but normally I do write every day. So
you write every day, but you still have your job as there are a lot of engineers. What type of engineer are you?
I'm an industrial engineer.
An industrial engineer. What does this mean?
This means that basically I'm like a business administrator with a little more technical knowledge. So I can work in marketing, which is basically what I did most of my career. I can actually go to the plant and work at a factory, and basically process engineering is what I would do at a factory. Or I can be in a finance department or basically anywhere in a company. But really my technical knowledge helps me be an interface between more the corporate side and the factory side.
And so do you think that your knowledge as an engineer also plays into your writing?
It does when I'm writing science fiction, because a lot of the science fiction, you have to get the science right mostly. So you can take some things can be unproven science, but you can do one. Like you can have faster than light travel, but everything else has to work. So
you only get one little suspension of disbelief.
Exactly. So being an engineer does help. I do have all the physics and mathematics background that you need to kind of understand it. I'm not a physicist, but I do have a good base of physics, etc. So yeah, it does help.
So, now what was it that got you into sci-fi fantasy as opposed to all the other possible genres? Was it because it was an easy? I don't know. I guess since you started writing earlier, telling your brother's stories as a kid, probably not so much having to do with school, but maybe.
No, actually, I think the sci-fi side comes from Star Wars. So I was a kid in the 80s, and like basically you had Star Wars, and that was the big mega blockbuster that like ran through everyone's lives. Everyone had Star Wars. Some people liked Star Trek as well, but like Star Wars had action figures, and you had the Lander and the Walker and whatever, and you went to a toy store and it was like shelves of Star Wars figures. So as a, I don't know, 5-6-year-old kid in the 80s, Star Wars was like the thing you wanted, the toys you wanted. I want Chewbacca, the action figure, whatever, the spaceships. Spaceships were cool. So
remember the little Yoda figure? Now it's baby Yoda, but back then it was the little.
That's probably still at my parents' house.
So do you collect those things?
I mean, I have a bunch from when I was a kid, but they're all broken and destroyed and used. And they're stuck in my parents' house. I'm not like a collector of pristine, perfect figures. I have the stuff that was left over from my childhood.
Well loved. They're well loved.
Yes. Exactly.
So what are you going to read for us today?
I'm going to read a story from Off the Beaten Path, which is a collection of shorts, which it does exactly what it says on the cover. It takes science fiction and fantasy outside the usual U.S. or Western European spheres of influence. Mm-hmm. Not all my science fiction is outside of that, but this does fall into that space. I'm going to read the first story, which is called Worm of the Mangroves.
Worm of the Mangroves?
Mangroves. Worm with I, like the dragon kind of worm.
Yes. Oh, W-Y-R, worm.
There we go.
Yes. And okay. And so in this book, these are all your short stories.
These are all mine, yes.
Not an anthology. Okay.
Right.
Very, very cool. Well, just before you get started, let me just say to everybody watching at home, this is the part in the show where I'm going to give him the whole screen. I'll be on mute, and I'm going to be in the comments. So as you guys are listening, if you have comments, questions, anything you want to ask, put them into the comment bar. And then when he's done reading, we will take your questions and answer them. So let me go ahead and put myself on mute and give you the screen.
Cool. I'll center the camera. I moved it around a bit. There we go. So, Worm of the Mangroves. Under the canopy and the twilight of noon's mottled illumination, where colors seemed twice as intense, not because they were bright, but because they seemed to fade into the depths of the forest, Philippe watched two yellow eyes disappear under the surface. The water was clear enough that he could follow the creature's progress for a few seconds, but then it was gone for good. He sighed. It would take him another 2 hours to get it to come that close again the following morning. All he could do was wait for his visitors to arrive. The animal's sudden retreat could only mean one thing. People were coming down the path. The only human presence the creature tolerated was his own. Maybe it sensed that he was its father. A young girl and boy approached. 7 or 8 years old, they were as clean as could be expected of village children whose playground was a rainforest, but their clothing was new and they looked happy and well fed. Their black skin, nearly blue in the dim sunlight, made it through the canopy, seemed to glow with health. "Hi there, Monsieur Philippe," the girl said. "What you looking for?" He essayed a stern look, but the children were unfazed. They knew him too well. Dragons. Really? They both moved closer to the water's edge. Where are they? You scared them away. Amélie, the little girl, cocked her head. How can we scare away a dragon? Don't dragons eat kids? Not these. They're too small. But if you come back in 100 years, they'll eat you. No problem. Don't be silly. None of the animals live 100 years. Not even the chimps. She seemed to take as a given that she, herself, would live forever. Actually, Philippe wasn't quite sure he was telling her the whole truth. He'd been seeing some unusual scarring on the local manatees, long, parallel scratches, as though the manatee had been scratched by a cat. But big cats, even the few that lived in the Gabonese rainforest, preferred to hunt on land. They most certainly wouldn't be hunting in water deep enough to hold manatees. But he said nothing. He really didn't want to alarm the villagers. Africa was still laissez-faire in its attitude towards most transgressions, but dragons living in a swamp would definitely bring attention from Chibanga, and then from Libreville. And that would lead to a whole bunch of questions Philippe really preferred not to have to answer. All he wanted from life was to be left alone in his shack beside the mangroves, and to be allowed to watch his creatures grow. He needed the children to think about anything except dragons. "Would you like to look through the microscope?" he asked them. They squealed. This was a rare treat. Slides were easy enough to prepare because the swamp water was teeming with microscopic life, and they could spend hours watching what they imagined to be wars between tiny alien empires. And, most importantly, they'd spend the next few days talking about it, too. Dishonor, heartbreak, and the end of his former life had come in the night, completely unexpectedly. Black-clad commandos broke through his windows, violated his privacy, and invaded his inner sanctums and jealously guarded secrets while he slept. Or so he imagined it. He hadn't witnessed it himself. Those self-righteous bastards who thought that they could keep science from advancing just because it offended their sense of what was moral and what was natural, who believed that the fact that they represented the whim of the ignorant but numerous masses gave them the right to act. How ironic that their first act was to kill the very creatures against whose enslavement they'd railed, the controversy reaching the highest levels of government. Even more ironic was that one of those very creatures, those crimes against the genome of humans and who knows what other species, had been responsible for getting him awake and out of the house just ahead of the strike force that the French government had, in its infinite wisdom, decided to send against its most famous scientist. They hadn't missed by much. The small ball of fur dropped from a branch, arms akimbo, but balance uncompromised. Her overlarge head bobbed a few times, but she was used to that already. "Hello, Philippe." Philippe gave her a fond look. He might be engrossed in a new project, but Poupée and her now deceased sisters had been his first great triumph. They'd told him that it was impossible to get near human intelligence in a creature the size of a spider monkey. They'd told him it was an abomination to even try. He'd proved them all wrong, as usual. While everyone expected him to attempt splicing human DNA with that of a small primate, he'd gone off in a different direction and used hamster genes as the base instead. They were actually easier to modify, and with a liberal sprinkling of dung beetle and scorpion DNA thrown in, Philippe refused to let his expertise in insects genetics go to waste. A small series of light, furry beings had slowly emerged from the chaos and the miscarriages. "Hello, Poupée, and my name is Philippe, not Flip. Try saying Philippe." "Flip." She attempted to smile, but looked like an angry rodent. They'd grown more and more intelligent as he learned from his mistakes until, one glorious day, a being that walked upright after only a few hours was born. The fact that she looked like one of the heads from Easter Island with a stickman body thrown in was not something that concerned him. Back then, he still thought he had all the time in the world to get the balance just right. He would have been able to create miniature humans in a few months more. "Children go away?" "Yes, and I'm happy that you didn't come when they were here. Thank you," Philippe said. She beamed at him, immediately making him wish that he had the time to engineer away those enormous incisors. If given another chance and access to his earlier research, it would be his first order of business. But he knew he shouldn't complain. Disproportionate teeth and all, Poupée was the only reason he wasn't sitting in some jail in Marseille, waiting for his media-hyped trial. "Where were you, anyway?" "Explore jungle," she said. She didn't meet his eye, and that made Philippe suspicious. But when he relaxed and reminded himself that anthropomorphizing what were just very smart animals was the first sign that he was losing his grip on reality. "Did you find anything interesting?" "No, just walk around." She followed him inside and took her accustomed place beside the hut's single western window, which offered the best illumination in the afternoon. She opened a book in front of her. Philippe watched from an armchair. He wasn't certain how well his attempts at reaching Poupée had taken. On one hand, when he'd tried to teach her the letters, the whole concept seemed alien to her, as if the logical constructs of spelling were just something her brain wasn't hardwired for. On the other hand, she'd long since left the single picture book in his library aside and preferred to attack the classics on his shelf. Every once in a while, she would turn a page, even. As he watched, Philippe wondered if it had been a mistake to abandon that line of research. Perhaps his decision to create something a little larger and more rugged to suit this larger and more rugged landscape had been premature. Poupée seemed to have little trouble navigating the byways of the Gabonese jungle. And yet, he couldn't deny that it was fitting. Intelligence should occupy the highest branches of the tree of life, and his new project would do that magnificently, while any descendant of Poupée's line would always be a snack, no matter how well they were armed. He dozed off as the tiny creature turned a page. The next few days convinced Philippe that he was utterly, completely, and irremediably losing it. It not being the first time that this had happened to him, he knew how to handle something like this. Peace would only come in the arms of some beautiful young ebony-skinned angel of mercy, preferably one who thought he was a tourist and pretended not to charge him, just asked for money to buy herself some pretties. He packed a couple of shirts and a few shorts. Intellectually, he knew it was all in his mind, but he just couldn't seem to shake the idea that Poupée was watching him intently all the time. On the few occasions he'd turned to look, however, she seemed intent on reading his old, weather-beating copy of Pride and Prejudice. Considering that the novel was written in English, and Poupée hadn't really managed to conquer French just yet, he felt she probably wasn't making much progress. He forced himself to turn away again. "Where you go?" Philippe almost jumped out of his skin. He had to force himself to turn back to her. "It's just the jungle getting to you again," he thought. "You've been in here alone for much too long, with nothing but the sound of insects keeping you company. That, and a dragon which is getting bigger and bigger and seems to thrive on humidity and dark green." He shook his head to clear it and walked slowly to where the tiny figure sat by the open book. He knelt. "I need to go to Chibanga. I'll be gone a few days. Can I go with you?" "You know I can't take you there. Is it because I'm different? Because people won't like to see me?" "They might like to see you, but they wouldn't treat you well. They would hurt you, and I don't want you to be hurt." "Why would they hurt me?" He sighed. "It's hard to explain, and I have to go." "Is it because I'm a monster?" "What? Where did you get such an idea?" Poupée gestured towards the book. He frowned. "There are no monsters in that book." Poupée waved at the shelf absently. "Other books have monsters. I don't have brothers, sisters, mother, even friends. And I think you not my father." "No, I'm not." "I have no father?" "No." "But I'm alive. How can I not have a father?" "I see that we need to have a long talk about this when I get back. Don't worry about it right now, all right?" "All right," she replied innocently, while her eyes said to him, "No way." He shook his head. He really needed a couple of weeks in the old colonial neighborhoods in Chibanga, where the few remaining wooden houses held the moisture of decades past beneath their peeling yellow paint, and the love of a sweet girl would find little wrong with his wad of euros, even if they were of the old design. He set off down the path, nearly at a run. But there could be, no peace in Chibanga. Even scented candles and the musky smell of Angelique that should have filled his world while she filled the room with movement could not drive away the accusing gaze. He wondered whether he should just leave Gabon. There were other places he could hide, and he'd be out of the public eye long enough that it was doubtful whether anyone would even care anymore. Just as he thought this, the beautiful ebony enthusiast in the room with him managed to get things just right, and he forgot about everything, but only for a few minutes. When the darkness stilled, and the only sound in the room was of the contented breathing as she slept, Two little rat-like eyes stared out from the darkest corners. Daylight, and a week or two under full sunshine, found him laughing at himself. He would go back, explain things to Poupée, and continue to live his life of seclusion. There was no need to look for safe havens somewhere in tropical Asia. He was fine where he was. When he felt that he'd accepted that in more than an intellectual way, he headed back, driven both by his resolve and the fact that he couldn't leave his other project unsupervised for so long with people living nearby. Not with a clear conscience, anyway. The hut, however, was deserted when he arrived on another warm, wet mid-morning. There was no sign of Poupée anywhere, and no piping voice calling him Flip. For a second, he felt an icy fist rummaging around inside his chest, looking for something to grab, but the moment passed. So what if the little hamster had gotten herself eaten by something nasty? She knew it was dangerous to wander too far from the hut and the tiny folding flap in the door. Besides, he had other projects to worry about, bigger things from both a physical and philosophical perspective. He dropped his bag unceremoniously on the floor and walked to the edge of the swamp, his feet sinking slightly into the soft clay. Now it was just a question of waiting. The creature was most active during the mornings, disappearing after noon to sleep. At least Philippe assumed it disappeared in order to sleep. He had no real way of knowing that, other than trying to track it through the mangrove swamp. That was not something he was particularly eager to try. There were other things in that swamp, beside what he'd placed there. Nothing too deadly, but some would bite, and others were contagious. He sat down at the point where mud gave way to water, buttocks planted on the relatively high, dry root, and waited. He knew that the eyes would be there sooner rather than later. They trusted him more and more as the days went by. A ripple in the distance telegraphed the presence of something huge in the water. He thought the creature had grown quite a bit in his absence, more than he would have expected. Another data point to measure the interaction of the genes it held. Aren't dragons supposed to fly? Philippe almost jumped out of his perch into the lake. The voice came from just above, amid the thick leaves of a koala tree. He thought for a moment. Poupée? The tiny creature's arrival was heralded by the rustling of leaves and the fall of a couple of nuts into the swamp. It looks like the drawings of dragons in your book, and I saw you looking at a picture labeled worm, which I found out is just a fancy way of saying dragon when you were working in the lab. He even has wings, so why can't he fly? The silence that greeted this question was filled with various things. The return of all Philippe's misgivings regarding the mental state of his diminutive companion. The sudden cessation of all wildlife sounds in the swamp as the V-shaped ripple wound its way between the thickest clumps of mangrove roots. The French geneticist sat petrified, the toes of his boots dipping into the warm water. Poupée, the least threatening figure one could ever imagine, both comically misproportioned and physically weak, walked slowly towards him, and Philippe scooted away. But short of running into the jungle, there was no escaping the questions. And if he was going to have to swim all his life, why didn't you give him gills? Or at least a body better suited to living underwater? What you designed only serves to make him suffer as he drags himself from one end of the swamp to the other. Philippe finally found his voice. He asked. That seemed to stop the flood. What do you mean? You keep saying he. How do you know it's male? The head, objectively tiny but huge on the furred body, cocked to one side. How could you not know? Isn't that part of the way you build us? Philippe ignored the word us and focused on Poupée's question. I never choose the sex. I could. It would be child's play, but I don't. I've always believed that a parent shouldn't be able to choose the sex of their offspring. Poupée's eyes widened. A parent? She stamped a tiny foot, a gesture that would have been ridiculous had it not been for the darkness of the humid swamp and the fact that the ripples had almost reached them. How can you possibly think of yourself in that manner? Parents are supposed to love and teach. You don't love and teach. You watch and study. You throw away the children you don't like. What? How can you say that? If you don't want me to know something, you shouldn't write it down in your notes, and then leave the notes where anyone can get them. Philippe laughed, forgetting about lurking bodies in the swamp. I see my projections about the balance between instinct and acquired learning was spot on. Your brain seems to be functioning at adult level, and you're only what, 6 years old? 7. A good parent shouldn't forget his children's ages. So what are we going to do now? Are you planning to create some more freaks that can't function in the real world? Perhaps a bird without feathers that has to use its beak to climb trees. Or maybe a fluorescent insect that can be seen from miles away by anything that feeds on bugs. That would certainly make it miserable, don't you think? Listen to me, Poupée, Philippe said. It isn't like that. I never wanted any of you to suffer. The misshapen doll snorted. Really? Can't you see? You're something beautiful, something that wasn't possible until a few years ago, he said. If I'm so beautiful, then why can't I go to a ball and show myself off? How do you think they'd receive me in the village if I showed myself to them? I know what I look like. They'd call me a goblin, or worse. She pointed towards the lake, where the 2 yellow eyes could be clearly seen. And what about him? If he were beautiful, he would be soaring through the skies. Philippe shrugged. They'd just shoot him down. It's better this way. Soon, he'll be able to walk, and everything will be all right, if I got the proportions right. Oh, you got the proportions just perfect, all right. He's a magnificent creature. How do you know? And why do you keep calling it a he? I call it a he because he told me he was male. I wish you'd cared enough to give him a name, though. As for the proportions, I can say it because I've seen him walking. He looks just like the dragons in your photos. The wings are magnificent. How could it tell you anything? It shouldn't know how to talk yet. Oh, I've been teaching him. I taught him all about you, how you made us, how we can never go out in the world because everyone will hate us, how you can go to the village when you're feeling lonely, and how we can't. How I saved you from being captured by the police. She seemed to remember he was there. Oh yes, your theories about combining the steep learning curve of animals who need to be prepared to fend for themselves from the day they hatch with the intelligence of humans seems to be working perfectly. But why would you want a talking dragon, anyway? And how did you get it to be so big? Did you combine whale genes with the alligator stuff? Philippe, flabbergasted by the barrage of questions, but more surprised by the high level of dialogue, raised a hand. Dragons have to talk. They're the smartest of the mythological creatures. Oh, I don't really care about that, Poupée replied. You see, mainly, I've been telling them about how I'll never be married now. How I'll never have a debutante ball. How I'll never meet Mr. Darcy, because I'm a freak, because you wanted me to be a freak. I told him that I was alone, and he asked me what it meant to be alone, and I explained. And then he was sad, and he disappeared for a few days. There's no need for him to be alone. I can produce as many of his species as he wants. I told him you'd say that, Poupée replied. Of course I'd say that. It's the truth. The tiny creature lowered its voice to a whisper. But I've told him, I've convinced him that it's a lie. You see, if you make any more of him, then he'll forget about me, and I'll really be alone. At least this way, there are 2 different freaks out there. But Poupée emitted a shrill whistle, and the water began to part around the long gray snout. She turned back to Philippe, her eyes dead. He's very angry with you. I wouldn't stop to try to convince him that I'm lying. The crocodile genes aren't particularly worried about the fact that you're his father. What do you want from me? Are you trying to kill me? Poupée shrugged. I'm not really sure. On one hand, I'm grateful that you gave me my life. On the other, I'm furious that you forced me to live this way. Maybe it would be best if you just ran into the jungle, and we'll see how this plays out. He took a step toward her, but she danced away, nimble as any forest creature. He had no illusions that he'd catch her. The sucking, splashing sound of a heavy body exploding from the swamp interrupted his reply. I think you'd better run now, Poupée said from the forest. Philippe stared at the beast in front of him for an instant. The doll was right. It was completely magnificent, huge and powerful, with a tail that seemed to go on forever, and obvious cunning behind those not quite reptilian yellow eyes. He knew a rush of pride as it spread its wings and shook them to get the water out of the folds. Then it turned to look at him, and Philippe held its gaze for a moment, trying to understand what lay beneath. And then he ran. That was Worm of the Mangroves from Off the Beaten Path.
All right. Wow, we have a bunch of questions too. Holy smokes. Yeah, and I have some questions too, because I was like, ooh, this is kind of cool. I have my own questions. Well, let me go back up and look. I kind of got to scroll back here a little bit. Let's see. You had a hello from an Oliver Middleton. I don't know if that's a name that you know, but just in case it is. So here we go. Since yes, since you mentioned that writers are readers who give it a try, tell us about some of your favorite authors who inspire your own writing.
So there's some obvious ones. Like I got dragged kicking and screaming into the science fiction literature field by Isaac Asimov. Writing has not aged well, perhaps, but it's really good. It's really good if you're a 12-year-old. But after that, I had a really long phase of humorous reading. And one of the writers I love absolutely is Douglas Adams of Hitchhiker's Guide fame. But for humorous writers, there's one man who writes the perfect sentence, every single sentence in every single book. And that man is P.G. Wodehouse. And if you've never read a Wodehouse book, I really envy you because it's awesome. No, it's not.
That's sci-fi?
Basically, it's English country house humor. It's basically he's the quintessential English writer, despite the fact that he lived in the U.S. for basically all his life. He wrote for Hollywood in the 30s and 40s, in the 40s and 50s mainly, and he's an excellent writer on a sentence level. He's just amazing. And other writers that I truly admire in the genre world are basically the science fiction, the canonical science fiction guys. Of the modern ones, there are two writers which I really love, which are Alistair Reynolds and James S.A. Corey of The Expanse.
Man, I don't know either of those names. Those are totally new names for me. I mean, everybody knows Isaac Asimov.
On the fantasy side, I read quite a bit. I've always loved Terry Pratchett, who is kind of the P.G. Wodehouse of fantasy. And I do enjoy the mythology behind Lord of the Rings, but Tolkien isn't necessarily the kind of writer I ever think of modeling myself after, because he was more about creating a mythology and a language and a history than he was about just writing the stories. In fact, if you understand what came before the Lord of the Rings, there's like the Lord of the Rings is a very tiny tip of an iceberg, and behind that is basically a love of languages, especially Old English, and trying to create a British mythology. So not so much that, but I do love the stories. So those are the writers that I would mention off the top of my head.
Fair enough. You have a huge library, it looks like, behind you there. Let's see.
I don't know if you can see it all. There's a bit more over there.
Yeah, there.
So both those, there's a shelf parallel to the wall behind me as well.
Yes, you can see its edge.
So yeah, there's a bit of everything in there. There's a bunch of sci-fi and fantasy, and there's some classics, and basically whatever takes my fancy, thrillers, and stuff like that. Yeah, so a little bit of everything.
So here we have, where does Gustavo find the best inspiration for his writing comes from?
That's an excellent question, and it's one that you're lucky you didn't ask Neil Gaiman, because he's very good at answering this with making fun of the guy who asked the question.
Why? Why would he do that?
It's basically, where do you get your ideas? And writers, as Neil Gaiman says, writers really don't know. They come to us in the shower, and well, at least I don't know. I mean, I don't know, maybe some writers do, but and they come to us at 3 o'clock in the morning when we're asleep. And if they're any good, we'll probably remember them the next day. Sometimes we won't. We'll see them a week later and say, why did I write this down? But the truth is that they basically come from two separate things which don't necessarily have anything to do with each other until you find that link. So, for example, if you look at the story I just read, there's a dragon, but there's a geneticist. So basically, the thing is, why is there a dragon in a swamp in Africa? And what does the geneticist have to do with it? So that's where you start thinking, okay, so why is the geneticist there in the first place? Why isn't he in a high-tech lab somewhere? And there's the story. You have to start telling the story. You have to understand what he feels like, why he's there, and try to understand what his creations would be. And it kind of flows from there. But
that's a fascinating way to form ideas. It's sort of like you're reverse engineering it, right? You're taking two ideas that kind of clashed into one another and then started asking the questions going backwards until you had a premise for something.
And once you have that, the story tells itself, essentially. You have to write it, you have to use the tools of the trade, but it's not mysterious once you understand that meshing those two things together pretty much forces the story to take a certain shape.
I have a cat sitting right next to me, and she is trying to partake in the conversation here.
I don't know when my two kids are going to arrive. I have two kids, and I have the doors closed, and they're out. So if you suddenly see a screaming 4-year-old just shooting through the living room, ignore it. I'll take it out.
That's perfectly fine. You are not the first person to have, a family. So let's see. Here we have. Do you feel like it's most important to have A, strong characters, B, mind-blowing plot twists, or C, epic settings?
Yes.
All of the above.
Yeah, if you can't have all the above, you should try for that. I mean, these aren't mutually exclusive. But if I had to choose one to not to answer the question, I would say that the strong characters carry a story through if you do not have a plot twist or an epic setting. A strong character, the reader will immediately like or dislike or hate or really want to die. And as soon as you have any kind of emotional connection, the story is much stronger for it. So,
well, it's kind of their story, though. If you have a really strong character, you're almost like that character's actual story is a story in the story, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But if the strong characters will kind of allow you not to have a lot of other stuff. You can do a bare bones, just the character's story and still be good. It's harder to do it with just the plot twists or just the settings.
Okay, let's see. Oh man, I feel like I have so many to choose from here. Here we go. Do you meticulously plan out your stories and characters first and then write? Or do you write the scenes first and then edit them into a coherent story?
Wow, none of the above. I'm what they call in the industry a pantser.
A what?
So basically, I start out with a setting, a character or a group of characters, and a general idea of what more or less should happen to them, and I start writing. And essentially, it's a scary process until you understand that it's going to be all right in the end. But I mean, that generally comes with a little practice. I mean, I have had stories that ended up nowhere, which I had to throw away.
Oh, but that sounds horribly sad.
I'm sorry?
I said that sounds horribly sad. You can't just throw that out. I mean, you should have like a journal where you keep the
I still have them on my hard drive, of course.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to be honest. Some of them I just said, okay, whatever. I spent a lot of time on this. I'll try to sell it. Some of them do sell. But as an author, you know when you screwed up the ending. Even if somebody bought it, even if the reviews are good. At the end of the day, like when I was putting together this collection.
Yes.
I eliminated a bunch of stories that could have qualified because I knew they weren't as strong as some of the others. So I am a pantser. I do know that it's going to come good in the end, but when I'm starting to write, I just try to make the scenes themselves be as good as possible, and I know the ending is going to come to me at some point, eventually.
I am wondering if you can, that word that you're using, I have never heard this word. So I'm wondering if you can spell it for me, because
Pants, like trousers.
Yes.
And it comes from seat of the pants. So a pantser
Gotcha.
is a writer who writes from the seat of his pants.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes, I actually also looked up, because when you first were using the word mangrove, I also didn't know what mangrove was, so I went and looked up like right as you started reading, whoop, hopped over there, and I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. They're pretty.
If you've ever been to Florida, or next time you're in Florida, you'll see that it's full of mangroves.
I have not. I think the only time I've ever been to Florida was when I went to Lima. We flew through Miami. So let's see here. Okay, we have how many drafts of your books generally two? I'm not. Oh boy.
He's asking us
how many drafts before publication?
Okay, people are going to hate me, but I do one draft, and then I go through and edit typos, and that's it. Unless I have a continuity issue, which I have to fix later. So basically, my writing process is the following: I write a chapter, and then I do it for a week until I edit it. But by the time I get to that chapter, I know where the story a couple of chapters further ahead is going to go. So I edit as a function of that. But if I get to the end and decide that I need something that's going to contradict a few chapters, I go through and fix that. I don't write another draft. So
that's pretty good writing for kind of one plus, right? Like not quite two drafts, but one with some corrections.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, I generally, unlike most writers, I generally have to, when I'm doing novels, I generally have to write and add more description and add more meat to each chapter, when most novelists are actually killing words. So I kind of write backwards to most people. I do take a little longer on that first draft than most people do, which is why I feel confident that I can actually submit a first draft. But it comes from being a short story writer against deadlines. Sometimes there's an opening which you have a couple of days to write on, and so I write a story and I just really quickly go over it, make sure it doesn't have any major typos or continuity errors, and send it in. And since I started in short stories and started writing against deadlines, that kind of turned into my process when I was writing novels. I swear I was going to rewrite, but then I said, no, I can't. I think it's fine. And then the good thing is that when you're working with traditional publishing, you have an editor on the other side. Self-publishing, you have to be a lot more careful yourself. And an editor is going to catch if you're wordy, if you're using a certain word too often. For example, I sometimes lead with the word so, especially when I'm doing dialogue, and they'll catch it, they'll change it. If you're doing self-published work, which I don't do, but a lot of people do right today because the technology makes it very easy, that is something I wouldn't recommend my process for someone who doesn't have an editor at the publishing house.
Because then there's kind of nobody that's really overlooking it.
Exactly.
So before I do another question that's in the comments, I would like to ask a question, if I may, because I wrote down a few questions, but then there was a bunch, so I've not really. Let's see. So I was curious what the name of the little poupée was. That it? What does that mean?
It's French for doll.
For doll. Okay, well, that was very easy, quick and easy.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll go to another one. Since we're talking in this story about basically the creation of life, right? The genetic engineering of life. I'm curious, are you interested in AI, and do you think that things like robots can become alive?
I think so, yes. I don't think it's going to happen very soon because of the amount of processing power and the way neural networks are set up. But I do think it eventually should be possible with the speed that technology is advancing right now. I actually think it should be. Whether it's going to come to pass or not, we'll have to wait. But I do think it should eventually happen.
The future is now. Well, what do you think differentiates a creature that is alive versus, I guess, maybe existing?
That's a good question. I think you've taken me out of science fiction into philosophy now.
Uh-oh. That was not my intention. I'm sorry.
Completely fine. I mean, I actually explore that very question in another novel for the same publisher, which is called Outside, which is basically humanity has transferred its consciousness on Earth, at least, into a worldwide simulation. Like their bodies are in storage and people are actually alive on a simulation. And some of the twists that this novel takes actually do go deeply into that question. And I think eventually...
That sounds like it's up my alley.
Oh, you should try it. It's called Outside. It's from... Well, you got to know David, didn't you? David from Guardridge Books?
Yeah.
You sent me your link, so I assume you met him. So that's why I'm doing the Guardridge Books today. But well, David loves that, and I think if you talk to him, he might send you one for review.
Ooh, that could be cool.
So yeah, it does delve into that particular question.
So okay, one, and then after, okay, this will be our last question, and then we'll do the drawing for which one did you want to do today for the drawing?
Whichever one you guys prefer to do.
Okay, so a choice for the winner.
Yep. We'll let
Okay, that's perfect. And so this
science fiction, straight science fiction with AIs and stuff, and then short story collections in far-flung places of the world.
Okay, so that said, now is the time where all of you out there watching put your name into the comments, and as I see them come in, then I will get them added onto the list, and then I will spin the wheel, and we will see who wins for to this afternoon's. So the last question that I have here, let's see. Here we go. What behind-the-scenes tidbit in your life would probably surprise the readers the most?
That's an excellent question. I actually have a really, really tame life. But let's see. I don't know. Something that would surprise people. I restore old cars. I don't know if that surprises anyone anymore.
I don't know how many people here know this thing about you. So
nobody knows this about me, but but yeah, I restore old cars. What else?
Why is that your hobby?
I'm sorry?
Why is that your hobby?
Because I've always loved like reading and cars are like my two major hobbies. So I've always loved cars. So now that I'm a bit older and I no longer drive at insane speeds on the highways and things like that young people do, I thought, well, what's something that can be a car related hobby which isn't necessarily dangerous to myself and my family. And restoring old cars works because not only do the cars not move at high speeds, they don't move at any speed because they're all in pieces all over the country. So yeah, it's a safe hobby.
Yes, it's safe. It is a safe hobby. Okay, hold on one second. I'm gonna pull up our wheel of win. That's kind of what it has come to be called here. And I'm looking. I have that question on the screen, and then I scrolled way past it. Here we go. There, that should do it. There we go. Yay. Okay. So I shall now pull up the wheel with the names on it. Here's my picture of mangroves that I was looking at. And I have a couple of names. I saw Newt out there. I saw, let's see, who else did I see out there? I saw Jack out there. Okay, so, yes. Okay, and then one. Yeah, I know. Where's my share? Where's my share? I've got it here. Okay, here is where we put the names in, and our long list of names. And let's see. So there was Newt, there was Jack, and did I one more come in there? Let's see. Yes, Caitlin Spell. Okay, I've got you. Let me get you on the list. Okay, and with that, I don't see any more names, so I'm going to go ahead and enter these. And now we will spin the wheel. And this is for you guys' choice of books. And Seraphine the Dragon, you are the winner of today's drawing. Congratulations. I think that should say Dragon Queen, actually, but thank you so much for being one of our patrons. If you want to be entered into every single drawing that we do here, you can join our Patreon at any time, and you will always be entered in a drawing automatically. And if you then comment in our various shows, you will get your extra bonus drawing. So congratulations on winning that. We will get into contact with you after the show. Yes, your choice of outside and or off the beaten path.
Right.
Okay. Hey, look at that. Good memory. So with that said, that is bringing us up to the end of the show. I want to remind everybody that Gustavo's information is in the low bar, also going in the ticker, with links for where you can go and purchase his books. If you do, please remember to give a review. It helps the indie authors so very much. And Gustavo, before we let you go this afternoon, is there anything else you'd like to say?
Well, I just wanted to say thank you, mainly because this is amazing. I mean, writers write for readers and people who listen, and we just love having a place where people are stuck to the computer having to listen to us. It's awesome having a captive audience. So thank you so much for being that captive audience. And Newt, the car is a Mercedes-Benz. It's a 38 Mercedes-Benz 170V, because I saw your picture, your question down there. So thanks for
gosh, I did not see that. I'm so sorry. I was looking at people's names. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and enjoy the rest of your weekend, because it's Friday.
It is. So awesome. My kids just arrived. They're crying. They were asleep in the car. So.
All right. Have a good afternoon.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.